Imagine a political system so clever, so all-encompassing, that it managed to rule a huge nation for 71 years without being your typical military dictatorship. It was actually called the perfect dictatorship. And for decades, authoritarians around the world looked at it with envy. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of Mexico's PRI, the political party that literally built a modern nation and then, when it fell, left behind a legacy of chaos and violence that Mexico is still grappling with today. All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to see how this thing was even built out of the ashes of a revolution. Then we'll look at its golden age, the so-called Mexican miracle, and where the first cracks started to show. After that, we'll watch the whole system spectacularly fall apart. And finally, we'll dig into the violent, chaotic dawn of democracy that followed. So let's set the scene. Our story really kicks off after a decade of just brutal civil war. Mexico was completely exhausted, it was fractured, and it was crawling with revolutionary warlords, these powerful figures called caudillos, who were all fighting for a piece of the pie. So the country was facing this massive question. And the answer they came up with? Well, it wasn't democracy as you and I might think of it. No, it was something way more cunning. A system designed not to win elections against competitors, but to absorb them, to eliminate competition entirely. The solution, which got its start way back in 1929, was one single, massive political party. The goal was brilliant, in a way. Bring every revolutionary general, every powerful social group, every union, everybody under one gigantic tent. That way, the only game in town was negotiating inside the party. Now, this is the architectural blueprint for how they did it, and it's a fascinating concept called corporatism. It wasn't just about politics, it was about organizing society itself. You see, under this system, big groups like labor unions, peasant leagues, even professional associations, they weren't independent. They became official pillars of the party. In exchange for benefits and a seat at the table, they gave up their freedom to act alone. It was a web of control.
And this party didn't just pop up overnight. It evolved. It began as the PNR, which was basically a club to get all the revolutionary generals to stop shooting at each other. Then, under a really key president, Lázaro Cárdenas, it became the PRM, which made that whole corporatist structure official. And finally, in 1946, it got a rebrand as the PRI, positioning itself to lead this new era of industrial boom times.
Now, the PRI built its power not just through control, but by actually delivering on some of the core promises of the revolution. President Cárdenas, for example, gave huge amounts of land back to peasant communities in these communal plots called ejidos. He empowered massive state-run unions, and in a moment of immense national pride, he kicked out the foreign oil companies and created the state-owned giant Pemex. These moves were incredibly popular, and they cemented the party's power for generations. So, with this incredible political stability locked in, the system then managed to unleash a massive economic boom, a period that everyone started calling the Mexican miracle. And I mean, for 30 straight years, Mexico looked like a huge success story. The economy was growing at a staggering 6% a year. The country was building massive infrastructure. We're talking dams, highways, power plants. Cities were just exploding in size. It really felt like Mexico was building a modern industrial nation, almost overnight. But, and this is a huge but, there was a dark side to the miracle. Underneath all the shiny new highways and factories, inequality was actually getting worse. Political corruption was everywhere. And if you dared to step out of line, if you were a worker on strike or a student demanding more freedom, the system's soft authoritarianism could suddenly show its very, very hard edge. And that hard edge was never, ever clearer than on October 2nd, 1968. Just 10 days before Mexico was supposed to host the Olympics and show off its new modern face to the entire world, government forces opened fire on a peaceful student protest in the Tlatelolco Plaza in Mexico City. Hundreds were killed. It was a national trauma that just shattered the illusion of this benevolent, stable government. The mask of the perfect dictatorship had been ripped off for everyone to see. Now, the Tlatelolco massacre wasn't the end of the PRI, not by a long shot. But it was definitely the beginning of the end. It was a turning point that started this long, slow-motion collapse that would take another 30 years to finally play out. After that, the system just got hit by a series of body blows. First, the economic miracle ran out of steam. An oil boom went bust, leaving the country with mountains of debt. And then, in 1985, a massive earthquake flattened parts of Mexico City.
The government's response was so slow, so pathetic, that it was a huge wake-up call. Ordinary citizens had to organize their own rescue efforts, and in doing so, they gave birth to a modern, independent civil society.
And just look at this to see the economic catastrophe of what they call Mexico's lost decade. The value of the peso just completely disintegrated. I mean, this isn't just numbers on a chart. This is the evaporation of the middle class's savings. This is family businesses destroyed. It was a complete and total shattering of public trust in the PRI's ability to manage the economy.
159%. Think about that for a second. That means prices were more than doubling every single year. The PRI's core promise, the very foundation of its power for decades, economic stability, was completely and utterly broken.
And then, the political system itself started to just crumble. In 1988, during the presidential election, the vote-counting computers mysteriously crashed, leading almost everyone to believe the election was stolen. In 1994, an indigenous rebellion, the Zapatistas, exploded in the South. And then, the unthinkable happened. The pre-zone presidential candidate was assassinated in broad daylight while campaigning. The system was literally eating itself alive.
And then finally, the dam broke. On July 2, 2000, for the first time in 71 years, the PRI lost a presidential election. A charismatic businessman named Vicente Fox from an opposition party won. It was this peaceful democratic revolution at the ballot box. It was a moment of just incredible hope for millions of Mexicans.
But that raises a really profound question, right? What actually happens when a system of centralized control, one that has governed every single aspect of life for over 7 decades, what happens when it just vanishes?
Well, the peaceful democratic sunrise that so many people were hoping for, it never really came. Instead, the transition to democracy seemed to unleash new and terrifying horrors. In 2006, the new government declared a full-on militarized war on the drug cartels. And in 2014, the entire nation was horrified by the forced disappearance of 43 college students in a town called Ayotzinapa.
And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the tragedy. You see, for all of its terrible flaws, the PRI dictatorship had maintained a kind of order, a corrupt stability. It operated under these informal, unwritten rules with organized crime. When that old system collapsed, it didn't leave a clean slate. It left a power vacuum. And that vacuum was immediately filled by warring drug cartels, all fighting each other for total control.
The scale of the violence that erupted is just staggering. In a period of only 6 years, the estimated death toll from the drug war hit 60,000 people. And that's not even counting the tens of thousands more who were disappeared.
And the Ayotzinapa case became the new Tlatelolco, a symbol of trauma for a whole new generation. The fact that 43 students could be disappeared, allegedly by local police working hand in glove with a drug gang, showed the entire world that even in Mexico's new democracy, the terrifying lines between the state and organized crime were hopelessly, tragically blurred.
And that's really what you should take away from all this. The fall of the PRI wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another much more chaotic one. Understanding the rise and fall of this perfect dictatorship is absolutely essential to understanding the profound challenges of violence, corruption, and impunity that Mexico continues to face today. The old dictatorship is gone for sure, but the fight for a real, lasting peace, that may have only just begun.